What's up? What's up? And welcome to Just Be Humans, the definitive podcast for business leaders who have built their businesses on relationship and are looking at digital marketing to scale those relationships. I'm your host, Danny Murawinski, and today we have a special guest I'm excited to announce, Dr. Kevin Switaj, who is the president and CEO of BZ Opportunity Management, a consulting firm providing high quality bid management, process optimization, contracts, and training support. He is an experienced proposal manager and executive with over 15 years of experience supporting a wide range of government contractors. A multiple award-winning writer in the field, he has presented at numerous APMP regional and international conferences. His most recent book is Keys to the Castle: Building Empathy and Creating into Bid Processes, which explores how we can better align proposal and business development to make empathetic connections with the evaluators. Dr. Kevin, welcome to the show. And I'm so excited to have a bigger conversation on this because just even in your bio alone, man, you hit one of my keywords is empathy. So I love that, but welcome.
Thanks, Danny. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Kevin, let's start with first I think the easiest thing to talk about here is your PhD. So you are a doctor, you have your PhD.
I do.
Take me back, when did you get your PhD? What's your PhD in? Let's kind of rewind that process. And I'm even more curious as to when did you decide to pursue the PhD route?
Yeah, so my PhD completely and totally perfectly aligned to proposal development is in 19th century British cultural and social history. So,
Interesting.
but I will say there are a lot of connections, and we can dig into that a little bit. But I think for when I first started thinking about getting a PhD, I was a history and poli-sci major undergrad at Rutgers, and I decided, I think it was my junior year when I was studying abroad in England, that I really wanted to go down the route of studying history and becoming a historian. So I went and got my master's at Villanova, and then did my PhD under an amazing professor named Dror Warman at Indiana University, and really got into the idea of how do we get to know what people did in socially and culturally in the past. So so much of history up through about the 1960s was about politics and military and the great white man story, basically, right? And how do we know what happened to the 99.9% of the population that weren't prime ministers or presidents or executives? And so how did they live? What influenced them? How did their experiences get reflected in culture and society? And so for me, the focal point of that was my dissertation was about how the Victorians remembered the slave trade in Britain. So the slave trade was abolished in 1807. So from the 1830s on, how did it come up in public discussion? How did it come up in public events? And my favorite chapter was writing about how it came up in school books from the 1870s on, when education first is required of children 12 and under, and how did these school books that all of a sudden you have this brand new industry of having to create all these school books, how did they talk about the slave trade and Britain's role in it? So worked on that, really was heads down on that through about 2004, 2005. Took a little break from it to get into the business world, because I realized around that time that it would be very difficult to get a job in academia. Because of the PhDs there were 2 new PhDs at least for every one job, and that doesn't include all the backlog. And that a lot of institutions were doing adjunct professors, so having that nice secure lifestyle wasn't really in the cards for most of us who were studying history at the time. But I was able to pivot and use those skills to develop a career in a more traditional business setting, and finished my PhD. I think I graduated in 2009. That's when I got the degree, which was 2 weeks after I got married, I got married 2 weeks after I defended my dissertation, and about 3 weeks after I graduated, my wife and I bought our first house. So it was a rather eventful spring of 2009.
I was going to say that's a very busy 2009. You had a lot of things going on.
Yep.
That's fascinating. So okay, so we got our PhD in history, and then you mentioned, okay, you realized you didn't really want to go academia.
Yep.
You kind of saw the market and got a sense of where things were going. You're like, okay, I really want to move and get into the business world. So, tell me a little bit about that transition and what kind of jobs were you
Mhm.
looking for with now you had this fresh PhD in history. So how are you looking to apply that to the business world?
Well, the first job I had was actually as the radio voice of the El Paso Diablos for the 2005 baseball season in an independent league for baseball, which was amazingly fun and was a really cool job, but definitely was not something that was going to pay the long-term bills when you're making $1,000 a month. Um, but I was looking for really a lot of jobs that revolved around training. Since I had been teaching a lot as a grad student, and I always enjoyed being in front of a classroom. That was one of the other concerns I had about academia was the shift away from, you know, classrooms to really, especially in larger institutions, to focus on publish or perish, where you're having to come out with new books every year or two and do articles and everything. And I just enjoyed the experience of being in front of a classroom where you're able to help people discover and learn new things. So through a family connection, I found a job as basically a trainer and doing some very basic IT support on a contract at the Patent and Trademark Office. And so I moved to the DC area, which I've been here 19 years now. And it was definitely interesting learning kind of how the industry of government contracting from the contract side, from when you're actually delivering support and providing that interaction and connection with the agency and with the people within it and the end users, and then transitioning from that into the business development side and helping develop the proposals and solutions to at a bigger picture scale or a bigger scale to solve their problems.
Fascinating. So, okay, so you got your PhD, you started doing some, for lack of a better term, MC work, right, with the minor league baseball team. Which,
Yep.
by the way, I used to be an MC for Red Bull, so I totally get it. It was super fun, but did not pay the bills. Um,
Yep.
but yeah, so you started doing that, and you're like, okay, I got to figure out something where I just married my wife, we just bought a house,
Well, actually,
so
this was all before I even met her. This was
oh, okay,
2005. I started doing the work in 2005, and it was actually my wife's one of the main reasons I even finished the PhD. I was just kind of letting it go dormant and just not because at that point I'm working on my dissertation, so there's no coursework involved. It's just research, writing, editing, all that, and I kind of put it on pause for a couple of years because other things were in the way. I wasn't using it, and my wife and I met and started dating in 2007. And it wasn't long after that she's like, and she was actually in grad school at the time for her master's in history. And she said to me, you're going to, if you don't finish this, you'll always regret it. And you'll always wonder what could have happened if you had finished your degree. And, you put all the time and effort in, you should get those 3 letters after your name. Right. So I spent a year, nights, weekends, finishing the research, finishing the writing, rewriting it again, because that's how we do things. Right. And ended up, defending my dissertation and getting the degree done. So it was really the push from her that got me going. But yeah, I'd been working a few years and was working full time while I finished it out.
okay, makes sense. That's helpful. So, as you were kind of working on your dissertation, that's when you had the opportunity to work over on the government side of the house, specifically helping with training and education around the proposal space, right? Is that what I got?
Well, the first one was doing training just on the systems and tools used at the Patent and Trademark Office. It was a
Okay.
contract. The company that I worked for is called Stanley Associates. We were the sub on the contract, and like I said, a family friend was working there and said, "Hey, this looks like it would be a good fit for you." And I interviewed, got the job, and yeah, I did that for about 2.5 years. Where I was, working, we would do day-to-day support with the patent examiners of helping them, if things came up that they needed, and then we would do larger training classes. The main ones I was involved in. Remember, this is 2007, 2008, 2009. So the whole concept of telecommuting and working from home was was really just starting. And so the patent office had a hoteling program where people would work, 9 days out of a 2-week cycle at home, and then have to come in for at least an hour once every 2 weeks. And so they started rolling this program out, and part of it was training people on the tools, both the hardware and software that they would need to be able to do that work. And so that was, I was working on that program, helping develop and design the training materials, and then delivering the training as well.
Interesting. Okay, very cool. I would imagine, I mean, obviously the patent office is massive, and there's probably
Yep.
a gazillion submissions that happen every month over month. So I would imagine there's a slew of tools that those folks would have to get very comfortable with.
Yep.
Also interesting too, right? Because I think, we talk about some of my other guests that have SaaS companies. One of the biggest, actually one of my favorite definitions of disruption, right? When you hear like a disruptive company, it's not necessarily that the solution is disruptive. It's that the adoption of the solution is what the disruption is, right? It's the user adoption side that causes the disruption. So I think that's a very interesting angle. So this is when you started to really kind of get your feet wet inside of the GovCon space haphazardly. Like I feel like most people kind of find themselves in, right? It's like, oh, well, I got my PhD. I was pursuing the academia path. I'm pretty good with training people. This seems like a good fit. I'll start doing this. Now, in that process, you mentioned, were you starting to like really kind of understand and learn how these businesses were winning the contracts and how that was affecting the folks on the back end on the government side? Were you getting privy to that information?
Yeah, somewhat. So after about, like I said, about 2.5 years, I was kind of getting tired of being on the contract that I was on. It was just kind of the same stuff. And so, my PM at the time said, "Hey, we don't want to lose you from the company. I think you'd be good on the proposal side." I had worked on a bid as a couple of bids as a writer and providing some support. And so I went in to shadow the proposal department. And I will remember this till the day I die, that I walked into corporate headquarters, and I was supposed to meet with this one guy who I'm still friends with, and this other person, this woman that I'm still friends with, came out and goes, so Tim was here till 4 a.m. finishing a proposal last night. So he's not going to be in the office today. He'll be, doing some work from home later. So you're going to shadow me in the morning and somebody else in the afternoon. I'm like, wait, what? What is this working till 4 a.m. thing? 4 p.m. That's when the workday ends, right? So, and so I shadowed, I interviewed, and they moved me over. Started as a proposal coordinator, moved up to proposal manager, and started to see kind of the tools, the mechanisms, the approach and strategy that goes into developing, I wouldn't just say winning bids, but develop compelling bids, right? Because there's lots of factors that go into whether a proposal is successful or not, right? There's not just the relationship side in terms of writing a technical proposal, but there's also knowing the cost, the pricing structure, the appetite for a higher cost but more beneficial solution. And so started to learn and really kind of dove deep into those ideas, and continued to look at and research that idea of what can we best do to make sure that we are putting forward a solution that not just addresses the client's needs, but also make sure that we are developing a way to become a partner with them.
Interesting. And just to catch people up that may not be in the government contracting space, just for my audience, just again, the way that the government works, right? If they need a solution, if they need a new product, whatever the case is, they have to issue out a request for proposal or RFP that goes out to the general public that anybody can basically bid on. So the companies that want to do the work for the government have to generate the proposal. And then that's exactly what Kevin here is talking about, which is building a compelling proposal. They go against the other ones. Obviously, there's a bunch of other factors that go into this, but essentially the government then selects what they believe to be the best proposal for their solution. And that's how folks are able to do business with the government. So just want to give that kind of brief nutshell for some of the viewers that aren't in the GovCon space. Because
Danny, this is very that might be the best summary and quick hit on what we do. But that's exactly right. Yeah, the government has to, through various legal reasons, and this goes all the way back to the 1790s. Again, as a historian, I've looked into this. But they have to have a fair and open procurement process to make sure that the government is getting the best value for money, and to avoid any conflicts of interest and potential um, bad investments by the government.
Yeah, no, spot on. So there's really an art to this, and I think this is the part that I'm really interested in. I think the audience would be too, right? And I've said this before. I think when we get into this type of a space, right, where we have this medium that is our communication vehicle called the proposal, we tend to get caught up on, okay, what is the government asking for? And can we make sure that we check all those boxes and make sure that we're compliant with how the government wants to receive the information? But we lose the part that I think that is very interesting that I want to touch on with your book, which is this proposal is still a person on one end that's creating it,
Right.
to a person on the other end who's consuming it. It's still people selling people. And I think that tends to get broken down, especially in the government contracting industry. It becomes very mechanical in some regard. So I'd love to chat with you about that, because you mentioned the word compelling, right? And then you also said something too, which I think a lot of people have seen this in the GovCon space, but this is also true just for commercial space in general, which is this like, well, it's a price to the bottom, right? It's a competition to the bottom of the price, the best, the cheapest thing for the best value.
Mhm.
Typically is how people consume it. And you're like, well, no. Well, what if we do something that's actually costs more, but it's a more compelling case? So can you talk to me a little bit about that, of like how you created something compelling, so on and so forth?
Yeah. So to get back to your, and to kind of lead it off, you mentioned specifically that it's a person to person engagement, right? And a lot of times we don't think of that in any type of corporate buying decision, whether it's to the government or, as you said, commercial bids or whatnot. But at the same time, we need to remember that there are people on the other side that are evaluating. Bruce Farrell, who's an amazing speaker involved in APMP for many years, and is a friend of mine, really sparked the idea behind the book and everything that I know we'll talk more about. And at one of the bid and proposal cons presentations that he gave, where he said that people make buying decisions at all levels based on emotion and justify it later with logic. Right?
Mm.
So we need to be able to make that connection, and need to be able to put our proposal together in a way that, like you said, is compliant, right? Because if we don't check the boxes and we don't have the right content and we don't have it in the right order, it makes it, the government can't award to us. In fact, if it is non-compliant, it doesn't meet the rules and structure, they have to ignore it, basically. But part of what we do to make it compelling is make sure that we put information into the proposal in a way that is most easily digested, understood, and evaluated by the government. So what do I mean by that? When we structure our proposals, right, we need to make sure that our structure matches the government's requirements, word for word, line for line, section by section. If we deviate from that, then we're making the government evaluators do more work, right? Because they're going to sit there with their checklist and say, okay, point one is you have to have a staffing plan that does A, B, and C. Well, if we don't have a staffing plan that does A, B, and C as our first points, they're now having to look through our document or search or do, control F, as in Microsoft Word or whatnot. And every time we do that, it might not be a really, really big, oh, now I'm really upset, but we're making things more difficult to them. And what we have to remember is the people who are evaluating proposals are often doing this as other duties as assigned, right? These are not their day jobs. Most of them are involved in operations and are the people who will be our end users or managers or, points of contact on the contract. And so they are doing this, outside of what their normal work responsibilities are, or sometimes even outside of what their personal responsibilities are. So we're in a case where we're making things more difficult for them. We're taking times away from their kids' soccer games or their golf game or just relaxing or their actual work duties, and they're getting stressed about that. So one way we make things more compelling is that we make sure it's easy, the information's easy to find. And then the other is we need to make sure that we're talking about who the client is, what they need, and most importantly, why they need it, right? Because that's how we're going to be compelling. We need to make sure that we're saying things both in terms of the content and in terms of how we present it in a way that's going to get the evaluators to say, they know who I am. They get me, right? If you think about it from just a general advertising point of view, right? When we watch
Right.
commercials, that's what commercials are built on, right? Is, oh my gosh, they get me. They get what my problems are. They get why it's a problem, and I don't want to say that our proposals are commercials, because they are, usually very technically dense, but what we provide needs to resonate with the audience. It needs to resonate with those evaluators to say, hey, these are people that I can work with because they know who I am.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Kevin, and it immediately got me thinking about digital marketing in general, because I mean that's what we do, right? And I think you see this. A lot of people have probably seen this, where they go through these, they set up these funnels, right? These super complex funnels, and the stuff that they need, like you mentioned it before, where it's like, oh, this is what you're looking for. We're going to put it right at the top. We're not going to make you look for it. We're not going to make you find it. There's so many tactics that go into the digital marketing campaigns. And one of those things that most people are interested in is the price. And they make the price the very last thing, or they try to hide the price somehow when that's really what people are looking for, because they're trying to even figure out if they're even qualified for this particular opportunity or not. And then furthermore, they try to hit it with all the emotional stuff up front to get you emotionally engaged. So that way, by the time the price comes up, you're like, okay, whatever, I'll do it. You've already kind of bought into the process. So it's very interesting and kind of synonymous on that end. And I think that that's something that, as you talk about it in the proposal space, this is where I think the word that I want to talk about here in your book that you mentioned is empathy. And I'm a firm believer that empathy is probably the primary driver in a lot of regards to get your message across to just about anybody. I think that a lot of people forget, especially in new engagements and especially in winning new business, they forget that whoever they're trying to sell to has hit that level of success before they ever met you.
Right.
So you trying to get their attention, their time, their energy, need to respect that and have that understanding and that empathy for them, that they've suffered and struggled up to this point. You may have the golden solution for them, but they've been successful without you. So I think that that's really interesting. And I'd love to hear a little bit about now, kind of pivoting a little into the book, at what point did you start to grasp that concept of the empathy side? When did that kind of manifest into your ethos? And the second question to that is, was there a particular person or a situation or a relationship that you had built in that process that kind of helped open up that aperture for you to understand, like, maybe we should start to look at this from an empathetic point of view?
Yeah, I think, and I mentioned Bruce earlier, and it was really that talk, and then getting to know him and seeing how he drives his engagements and his presentations. So Bruce is an amazing guy. As I said, he was probably one of the best speakers I've ever seen. He's been very public. He had a significant bicycling accident back in the spring of 2020. I believe if I remember right, he was given a 15% chance of living to survive. He was in a coma for quite a while. He has survived. He's had aphasia as a result of it. He has been doing incredibly well in terms of, you can imagine this award-winning, best speaker at Bid and Proposal Con for 2 straight years, having to basically learn how to verbally communicate again. And he gave 2 presentations at this year's Bid and Proposal Conference, and it's just amazing to see the growth and engagement and just his love of the industry. But to go back to the idea, so when he was giving that talk about buying on emotion and justifying later with logic, I think the proposal space forever has been focused kind of on the opposite end, right? We need to show them logically how we're the right answer, right? And that goes down to, we need to make sure we're structured correctly. We need to make sure that we're making all the technical points, that we answer the requirements. So in government solicitations, they often provide you with a statement of work, which is a list of things that you have to do, that they're looking for you to do on the contract, right? So we need to make sure we answer all of those. And we need to make sure we show them the technical capabilities that we have to do all the work, and that we've done it before. And that's really been a driving force. And the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about how we need to be thinking about the emotional connection that emotional need to in the buying process, I realized how much more we need to make an emotional connection in the proposal. So for me, an empathetic proposal is one that makes that emotional connection with the audience, with the evaluators. And I don't mean that we want them to sit there crying, and we're not writing the great American novel or anything like that, right? But we need to make sure, as I mentioned before, that we are talking to who they are, what they need, but most importantly, why they need it, right? Because there's many reasons why they may need a particular service or why something might be a major issue for them. An example I use when I do a lot of training is a lot of government uh, uh, stakeholders are worried about employee retention on a contract. These people have gotten to know the agency, they know how to work there, they know the type of work that they're doing, and they want to make sure that they are keeping those people. But what's driving that need for keeping those people can be very, very different. If you're working in the intelligence community, the need might be based around the very complex security requirements in order to get a security clearance. Most people have heard about security clearances. They are not an easy process to go through, and especially the higher level you get, the more work it requires, the more time it requires. So every time you lose somebody who has that clearance, it's very difficult to find the people with those clearances. And more importantly, it becomes very expensive, both if you're bringing in a new person to get that clearance or to hire somebody who already has it. At other agencies, it might be the loss of incumbent knowledge. Maybe the agency's transitioning from legacy software and tools to, as you mentioned before, a SaaS environment. So you really need people who understand both sides of that arrangement and what the systems do and how they work in order to make sure that that SaaS solution provides what the end users need. So there's lots of reasons that might be driving somebody to be worried about losing employees. If we don't know that reason behind it, or we're not able to write to that reason behind it, the person's going to say, okay, that's fine. They understand that I need people. And you'll probably get a check or even maybe a check plus as part of that. But when you show them that you understand why that's a problem, they're going to be more invested in what you're proposing as a solution, because you get who they are, right? You get what's driving their need. And anytime we do that, both personally and professionally, it becomes a situation where we can make that deeper connection and people are more willing to listen, right? One of the things I always tell my teams is, you want to make sure that you're saying things that directly relate to their experience and their problems, because if you don't, then it's the same as if you're just going to stand up there like the stereotypical greasy used car salesman and talk just about what you feel you need to get them into that 1978 Pinto, as opposed to getting them the car or the support that they actually need.
I love that. I think that that's a great analogy, right? And I think that too many times we position like I get it, and I think a lot of people get it, especially those that run a business. And I want to talk a little bit about BZ, right? Because as a business owner, you have needs. I mean, all the way down to I got to keep the lights on for my house. I got to feed my kids, right? Never mind all the other ones that come along to it too, as well as paying your staff and keeping the lights on at their homes and so on and so forth, right? So it becomes very, I think, easy for us as business owners to become very narrow-minded in the way that we approach new opportunities in terms of what do we need? Let's check our boxes off first, and let's make sure that that's the thing that we get. And then, we can talk about the customer after we get what we need, right, which defeats the whole empathetic purpose, right, of what you're doing. It's very quite the opposite. It's well, no, let's find out what they really need. And then is our solution the right fit? And then if it is, if we believe it to be, then that's going to naturally drive a more compelling proposal, a more compelling message, right? So tell me a little bit. So when did you kind of adopt this mindset, and was that around when, or I guess a better question would be is when did you start BZ?
Yep. It was almost it was January 2018. So we are coming up on our 7-year anniversary on January 20th. I will forever remember it because it was the day of about a 9-hour government shutdown. So the government had not, the government has to pass the funding bills and all of that. They were a little tardy in doing so. It was a Saturday. My last day at my old company was on a Friday, so I started full on a Saturday. I actually had projects to start on Monday, to be on site with a client on Monday. So technically our first day was a day of a government shutdown, which fortunately has not bode poorly for us. That there's been a lot of that, but that was so it would be 7 years on January 20th.
Okay, so what compelled you to start BZ at that time? What was that transition like? And I think a lot of folks that are interested in doing their own thing, it's a big leap, man. It's a scary thing, and I know I've experienced it. I think a lot of people that are interested in going that route, that's the hardest thing. I mean, you're now the master of your own destiny. So what was that moment for you when you decided we're going to jump into BZ, and why did you start it in the first place?
Yeah. So actually, it's funny. I thought, and I came up with the idea for BZ the first couple of days of the last job that I had for somebody else. So I walked in as the director of proposal development for a mid-sized government contractor, about $100 million in annual revenue. And when I walked in the door, we had 5 live opportunities, and myself, literally, my first minutes at the company, and 1 other proposal professional. So we had been using consultants as to support several of the efforts. And one of the consultants had come from a large agency and had this amazing resume that really spoke to the type of support we needed with that specific customer that they were working on. And that first week, the capture lead was out of town. They were on vacation. And I was having a lot of trouble getting in touch with the proposal person that we had, the consultant, and wasn't getting great engagement or a lot of information. And so when that capture lead came back the following Monday, she called me into her office, and we knew each other from a previous company. And she goes, "Kevin, it's great to have you here. You need to fire this consultant," because they had done nothing the week that she was gone. And I realized that sometimes resumes are awesome, but you don't know the person behind them, and you don't know how they're going to work and if they're going to work well within your environment. So the other consultant we had was a 1099, an independent person who was working on his own. And again, somebody that I had known for a while. And I went to him and said, "Hey, can you take on this other bid?" And he said, "I'd love to, but I'm not only am I working this one bid for you, I've got another couple bids that I'm working for another client. I just don't have the bandwidth." And that side of the argument is you have people that you get to know, that you develop those relationships with, but they don't have the ability to scale because they're an individual. And it made me realize there was a gap in that in the proposal and bid support consulting market. And that gap is the ability to have those relationships, to build those relationships, provide that customized, tailored support on a bid by bid basis, but do so at scale. So I like to say that that BZ is an intentionally small but comprehensive support firm. So we only have consultants on our books who are people we know and trust, or come highly recommended and referred by those we know and trust. Because that not only allows us to make sure we have high quality consultants, but it also allows us to make a better fit within that client environment. So we tend to ask questions like, what is your team's communication style? Are these people that are working on the bid full-time devoted to the bid, or are they also doing their day jobs? How are they, what is their normal hours of operation? Are they big picture oriented, or are they detail oriented? All these additional kind of soft skills / personality / working comfort types of questions that then allow us then to look at our consultant pool and say, oh, this person's a really good fit for that, or this person would not be a good fit for that working environment. So that when we get into an engagement with a client, it becomes that person can fit in perfectly and help make that team be greater than the sum of its parts. So that's kind of the driving mission behind BZ, is to find the right people for the right opportunities in the right environment for our clients.
Gotcha.
And as you
No,
said,
that makes sense.
it's all about the client, right? And so when we go in and we have clients from several within the top 10 largest government contractors to, I believe it was 7 of the Washington Technology, which is an industry publication, recently put out their Fast 50, which is the 50 fastest growing firms in the space. And we have 7 of the top 30 as clients of ours. And so,
excellent.
yeah, and it's about building those relationships and making sure that those companies get the support that they need, because no matter the size of the client, we want to make sure that that proposal consultant, or whether it's a manager or a graphics person or whatever, that they're able to work within that environment and make sure that the client receives the support they need, but also that it's done in a way that makes the relationship, both for the consultant and for us as the consulting firm, uh, not just profitable in terms of financially, but profitable in terms of the type of engagement and being a rewarding experience for everybody on all sides.
Interesting. Okay, so that makes sense. So this is now 2018. So you just started on a day that the government decided to shut down, which
Yes.
is very ironic. I think that that's got its own story in itself, which is awesome. So now, and you mentioned like right on Monday, you had work immediately, right?
Yep.
So like you kind of had this teed up pretty well. I think you probably
Yep.
already facilitated some of those relationships. You're like, look, I'm going to come in and do this. I'm going to do it better.
Yep.
I just experienced this with, these guys with great accolades and great resumes, but they don't perform. We're wasting money. I have a better solution. I'm sick of seeing it done this way. We're
Yep.
going to create this better solution. We're going to understand not just you being the customer, but also your customer of your customer.
Yep.
And we're going to put together this kind of strike team, if you will, of people that are going to befit your culture, as well as take the customer that you're trying to sell into as the number one account as why we do what we do. Right? Am I kind of catching this?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And it started with just me. It was a single person operation for a large chunk of the first year in terms of direct billable work. I had, and my wife is my partner when it comes to this. She's involved in the company, and not just the operation side, but the emotional support side. And she was a big part of setting it all up, and being engaged with it. But yeah, we started with that of saying, hey, it's, and most of it, started with those personal relationships. The first several clients I had that I had, because I was the one doing the consulting, were people that I knew, that I had worked with, that I had developed strong relationships with. And I was like, hey, I'm doing this on my own now. How can I help you? What do you need? And whether that was running proposals or doing training or being involved in process, evaluation or whatnot. And then as I developed those relationships and as I proved that me and we as a company were able to meet their needs, we were able to start expanding and start bringing in different consultants and in not just, in the proposal management role, but also auxiliary services. Like I mentioned before, proposals are I always like to say proposals are a team sport. There's lots of things that need to go into it. So it's not just managing and making sure the effort is running correctly. It's making sure that it's written well. It's making sure that there's a good edit and desktop publishing to make sure that it reads and looks right. We always want to have graphics. So making sure you have a graphic artist who is really strong in making concepts that are word for word into a visual. There's lots of other support that we can provide. And so we started expanding our services, but we started with that bedrock of, hey, you know who I am, you know how I work. I'm only going to bring in people that I know can do that level and that of work and engagement and support. And so that's how that's how we started growing.
That's the trust, man. And that's 100% coming from those relationships. So in the process, and now let's kind of fast forward. So we went from 2018, you started BZ. Now 2020, you meet Bruce and you hear this very compelling message from Bruce.
Yep.
And you started to foster that relationship. Would you say that kind of started to change a little bit in your trajectory, both with BZ and personally, as far as how you viewed the world?
Yeah, I think definitely professionally, it definitely, made me think more about how we can, both as a firm and working with our clients, make sure that those underlying needs, that those, and once again, what's driving those needs, can be addressed. And then, that was really kind of the impetus of the book, as we've talked about, and kind of, thinking about how we can better relate with our clients. It was around that time, obviously, the complicating factor that happened in early 2020, being COVID, shifted the dynamic as well in terms of going from in-person relationships. And it's 2019. I was on travel probably at least a couple times a month, working on site with clients, conferences, whatever. And obviously, March of 2020, and I will forever remember the weekend before everything shut down, because my son and I went to a rugby match in DC. Our whole family went to go see Villanova play Georgetown in in DC as well. We lived in the Northern Virginia suburbs, so did all of that, and then the following weekend, I think it was that Thursday, everything was canceled. Right, college basketball ended, NBA ended, everything, the rest of life then quickly followed. Right, schools and everything, and it shifted the dynamic of how to develop and maintain those relationships. Right, so now it's much more about calls like this, doing video engagements and how you can articulate that personal relationship in a virtual setting. And so I think identifying how to get that information became, especially for our clients, became a little more difficult because it was a lot harder to meet individually with the clients. So how do we do the research? How do we dig into what the government needs in this area or what's driving this procurement? Became a lot more difficult for our capture friends, who are the ones who are driving that. Capture is another function within business development where they're in a lot of B2B sales, they're more the sales staff, but they're the ones who are developing those relationships and are the ones who are kind of mining that information. And those of us on the proposal side are usually involved in making sure that that information gets cleaned up and presented in a way that will resonate most with the audience. But that part of the relationships became a lot harder, I think. But there was a lot of good work in terms of, like I said, maintaining some of those relationships through new virtual means, creating new relationships, and doing research outside of that.
Well, I think it kind of forces the hand, right? I mean, I think that most people, I think if you take two people and you put them in a room, for the most part, most people are able to figure out some type of common ground and start to build some sort of a relationship. Now, that doesn't work all the time. Of course, there's always going to be the outliers of, far different ideologies. But, I think for the most part, us as human beings, we're a social species, we're herd animals, right? Like we're wired to seek connection with one another. And the digital means has been a challenge, I think. And one of the reasons why, like even the foundation of why I started this podcast, right, is like, how do you translate that on the digital front? You mentioned the video calls. Were there any other touch points that you did with your customers to kind of help foster and nurture those relationships along, now that we've entered into like purely digital with COVID? Can you tell me a little bit about that, as far as like what were some of the things that you were proactive on that you were able to kind of help continue nurture and foster those relationships?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was video calls. We did a lot of our clients. I was able to, especially our individual contacts. There's a lot of texting involved. Being able to just pick up the phone and not call, because nobody makes phone calls anymore. We all know that. But sitting down and texting and being like, "Hey, how are things going? What do you need?" And getting a quick note back. I think sharing both professional, personal stories on social media was, I think, part of it as well. We used our LinkedIn account to talk about various things that were going on. Whether it was looking at things on this date is something that we pushed a lot, and at that time, as a historian, I like to make sure people know that things have happened in the past, but also sharing experiences about what was going on in terms of working virtually and working remote. And I have my kids are now 13 and 11, so that would make them they were 7 and 5, I guess, when it was happening, or a little older than that. But they were third and first grade, and so they were doing school. My wife was working at the dining room table, which is a couple rooms over, while I was in here, and sharing how we were doing that. We also did a couple of free online classes that we also posted online about ways to best use digital resources to do your work. So what this is right at the beginning. What do you need? How do you set up your schedule? How do you set up an office? Whether it's an office or whether it's the spot at the dining room table, what are the things that you need to be able to be successful with that? And sharing that information and being like, hey, we're here for you still. Yes, we might not be able to come into the office and see you, but we're here and we're able to work the hours that you need us to work. And the government continued to put out solicitations and continue to procure services and support. They moved to a much more virtual environment. One of the other things that I do besides proposal management is I do oral presentation coaching for for contractors. And we can talk more about what's going on there too, and how that is much more of a human engagement, especially now. But those moved to virtual environments, whether it was over Teams or the first one that I had. And this was one that was due about 2 or 3 weeks after COVID started. We ended up having to provide a audio recording of our presentation that they could listen to while looking at our slide deck, right? And that was interesting to get everybody to record on their own computers. And then I sat here, with the broadcasting background, I sat here and stitched it all together and made it into a single audio track.
Interesting.
But yeah, it was, I think it was a lot about using different tools to maintain those same relationships, and making sure that our clients knew we were here for them and that we were still able to support, like I said, even though we weren't able to be one-on-one.
I think there's two things that I definitely picked up on that I thought were spot on, right? One is probably one of the most underrated things, which is just a short text message to your folks. Hey, just checking in. How are things? Right? Like that goes so far for so many people. Wow, you thought of me. And never mind outside of, winning business and this, that, and the other, but just from a regular human perspective. I know it's happened to me a handful of times where I have a friend that I haven't thought of in, I don't know, decade. And they shoot me a text out of nowhere, like, hey, Danny, just checking in. How are things? How's life? It's like, whoa, you thought of me? Like, wow, thanks. Things are good. How are you? Immediately it creates this positive environment. So I think that's definitely something to be spoke on. And then I think the other piece that you talked about, which was very interesting, is you started to kind of pivot your direction in terms of like, well, hey, here's some things. Like, here's the secret sauce. Like, here's a tech stack that maybe you should consider. Here's what we're doing at home. Here's how we're operating at home, and it's working for us, right? Like those types of value forward pieces start lending itself towards that, what we call in the digital marketing space, like thought leadership pieces. Yeah. So it helps people identify with like, okay, this builds trust. This is a trusted source, not just for your immediate relationships, but also for the net new relationships. Yeah. Which kind of brings me to the book, which that's clearly, obviously, a thought leadership piece. What point did the book start entering your mind and your ethos of like, you know what, like, I think I'm going to write a book? When was that?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I've loved writing ever since I was pretty much able to pick up a pencil. My first dream job was to be a sports journalist, and I would sit and watch NFL games in the early 80s when the New York Giants were horrible, and would write recaps of the game. So writing for me was always exciting. That's why I loved history, right? I love studying history. History is about reading and writing. Well, that was right up my alley. And so I had always been writing. I'd been writing for a while. I had my own blog. We still have it on the BZ site. It is unfortunately not exactly been a focal point given everything else that's been going on. But I keep saying, all right, I'm going to rewrite. But it was probably around the beginning of COVID that I was like, you know what, it was right around that time that I'm like, I want to write this as a book. I think there's a good message here for the industry of how we can continue to push the envelope of what is considered not just best practice, but what is considered the best way to make a connection with our clients. Because APMP, which again is the Association of Proposal Management Professionals, it's the largest professional organization for those of us who work in bid and proposal development. It is, they talk a lot about client focused proposals, right? And which is that you write about, that you focus on the client in your writing. You focus on who they are and what they need. And for me, it needs to go further than that. It needs to be a client-centric proposal. And what's driving that, I think, especially, are a lot of things that we can get into. But one of the main drivers, I think, is because it is such a hyper-competitive market. And when you're getting 10, 15 proposals, of which, let's be honest, at this point, AI is being involved in writing a large portion of those. How can that proposal stand out? Right? How are you going to be able to make that connection? Once again, like we've been talking about, how can you make it a person-to-person relationship? And talking about, again, what they need, why they need it, as I discussed earlier, that was for me the kind of the driving force behind it. So how do we reorient what we're thinking about and what are the best practices within proposal development? How do we reorient that to really drive home the point that we need to know those three key things: who the client is, what they need, why they need it, at throughout the process. So what are some ways that we can do that? What are some ways that we can, while still holding true to the best practices that APMP and the industry has held, how can we evolve those best practices to make sure that we are making those connections from day one, from when we identify an opportunity to when we submit and win the work? And
Gotcha.
so
And
I
so you,
started,
it was
I
in
started writing, and
2020?
it started in 2020. Um, I am very old school in that I like to handwrite the vast majority of things first. Oh, I can show you the handwritten copy of my dissertation. It's around, I think it's around here somewhere. Um, but I tend to handwrite first, the first draft, and then sit down and type it, because that's been a great revision process for me. It's the
Yeah,
way that my mind likes to work. And took a couple of years to write, edit, you know, get it all aligned, and came out I think about 2 years ago now, if I'm remembering right.
that's awesome. Very cool. And so now moving forward into today, so you've published the book. BZ is doing well. You've grown that business. We've come out of the purely virtual space that we've
Yep.
been in, and now we're kind of re-engaging. And now this is like interesting hybrid methodology that I think a lot of people started figuring out. Right? It's like, oh, well, we could actually solve a lot of problems just virtually, but there's this definite component of brushing shoulders, being in the same room, where you really start to get a lot of great things happening. Right? So now, what's your kind of, how do you envision the future of where we're heading with, you know, not just how the proposal space is going to work, but also how other folks like you are taking the lessons learned from the COVID times and the digital times and the things that we did prior to that and building these relationships? What do you think is the path forward for a lot of these folks that, might be listening to this, that are kind of in a similar situation as you, that they've built something up, they've built these relationships, they maintain the relationships digitally? What would be some thoughts for you that you could maybe offer a couple nuggets of ideas of where you're heading?
Yeah. So I think from the proposal space, I think where we're really seeing is a shift to, which is interesting, and kind of ties it all together, is a shift more towards oral presentations. We're seeing that in a lot of uptick in that over the last 12 months or so, both virtual and in person. Um, and I think a lot of that comes down to not just the expanded use of AI. And, if, yeah, sure, you can write a proposal about, software development or base operation support, because you're able to, you know, tell chat GPT what to write. But can you actually do the work? And so,
Mm.
being able to see the people who will be delivering or supporting you on that contract, and are they the right people to work with you, right? I think that's a big part of why we're seeing oral presentations increase. But I think the other part, to be honest, and this gets into, I think, the broader points as well, is that we're seeing a younger evaluation workforce.
Mm.
So, I'm 49. So, growing up, we read books, and, did a lot with, pen and paper and all that. And I look at, people the generation younger than me, and I look at my kids, and they're learning in a much different environment, and much different way, and much different tools. They are much more multimedia based. They are much more, engagement based. They are much more driven by, the more social interactions almost in their educational process. So it's, my kids don't have textbooks, which
Mm.
confuses the heck out of me. And I feel bad because they go, and Danny, I don't know exactly if you remember this or not, but I used to love getting the textbooks and then, cutting open the paper bag and making that the book cover so that you could write or draw or whatever you want on it.
I
My kids,
remember doing that.
yeah,
Yep.
my kids don't even do that, right? They don't have that. They don't get that luxury anymore. Um, but I think, what that means is that oral presentations are much more in line with how they've learned and how they best process information. And so
Interesting.
I think that's part of what's driving it. Now, how does that pivot to general business? I think being able to make clear, coherent messages in shorter bites is important. That's why I think, we've seen proliferation of blogs. Danny, I know you do a lot of video stuff. I think that's really important too. And it's something that I'm looking to over the next, several months, looking to expand what we do in social media in terms of those quick hitting video, engagements, to not just focus on what we do or how we do it, but also just to make some of the points of why things are important or how things are impacting us, personally and professionally, and how that might add value to other people. But I think that maintaining those relationships and doing so in ways that will best resonate with the people that we're trying to engage with. So, not coming to a meeting with a pitch deck that goes through all the, experience we have and all of that, but making it more conversational, and whether it's virtual or in person. Hey, I know I can give you the background of who we are and all this great stuff, and I'm happy to tie that to your needs. But more importantly, what do you need? Why are there problems? What is your engagement? I met with somebody who had just started as a chief growth officer recently at a company, and I'm like, so how are things settling in? What have you identified as your big needs short term to make sure that you can start off successfully in your job? And are there ways that we can help you with that? And driving back to that, what do you need, right? And I think that that's something that the tools and the approaches and the ways in which we engage might change, but I think that for anybody, that's the number one thing, right? Is making that connection by not just showing interest, but being interested in what they need. And, if we can't answer it, if we can't solve it at BZ, I usually will say that, because I don't want to provide services to a client that we're not comfortable with, that we don't know how to do, because from a purely selfish point of view, it hurts our reputation if the work doesn't go well. But from that relationship point of view, it hurts the relationship, because now they're not going to come and trust us on other things. So, there are people that we recommend work to. So, hey, we don't do this, but, we've developed this relationship with this other person, this other firm, and I highly recommend that's who you work with. And so, making sure that we're able to know who our clients are and have them trust us enough that we're open and honest and able to work closely with them, I think is the key. And again, I think that that's something that is the same, whether it's in person, virtual, hybrid, whatever. It's making those connections and building that trust.
Seems like, between what you mentioned with the oral presentation and also your position and how you look at things, what I come to one word, which is humanization, right? Like, you're humanizing the process. It's going back to the humans. It's going back to, like you mentioned, it's a CGO that just got a role, being vested in their career path and their success in that role. That's a very, very different conversation than, hey, I know you have control of budget. You want to, allot some of that to us so we can win a contract, right? Yeah. It's like, no, well, where's the right solution? And then I love the fact that, and I think that more businesses should probably start to adopt this in terms of like, you know what, we're probably not the right fit. And that's okay. Like, that's okay. It's better for everybody in the long run. Right. And I think that that's another piece of it that, again, that comes back to that human element. So I really appreciate that. And I think I think you're spot on, Kevin. I think you're heading in the right direction for sure, as far as what I've seen as well. Let me ask you, kind of coming up to the end here, what's some good ways for people to, if they want to learn more about you? Let's maybe start with the book. Where can they find the book?
Book is on Amazon, so you can either search Kevin Switaj. I'm the only one that I know of in the world. My kids like to joke around that my kids are hyphenated. My wife's last name are hyphenated. So they're like, we're the only Paolo Switajs in the world. We know that if that name comes up, it's us. But yes, Kevin Switaj, if you search on Amazon, keys to the castle as well. We also have it linked off of our website, which is bzopportunity.com.
And for those that are listening, Switaj is spelled Switaj.
Yes,
So
Kevin.
Like it sounds. Yep. I get it. Look at my Murawinski.
Hey, well, we're both of Eastern European / Polish descent. They don't translate well from to the English language.
Nope, but that's okay. So okay, perfect. So that's finding the book. And then what about if they wanted to engage you directly? What's your preferred method of people contacting you?
First is probably easiest is LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find there. Once again, Switaj, Swit as in Thomas, A as in Apple, J as in Joseph. Yes, I'm very used to spelling it for everybody. But I think that's the easiest way to get a hold of me is through LinkedIn and connect, and then we can, have a further conversation. Whether it's as we said, email, text, chat, through LinkedIn,
Perfect.
whatever. That's the easiest way.
And I'll put all of these links in the show notes as well for those listeners. So if you want to click in, you'll be able to see all of them at the bottom of the show notes. So we'll add those in. Kevin, do you have anything else that you'd like to say to the audience, or any closing statements or thoughts?
Yeah, I just thanks Danny for having me. It was a great conversation, and I things I love speaking about are how we can make better connections with our clients and how we can bring that human aspect back in, especially with all the proliferation of technology and fear and concern about AI taking over everything. There's still a place for that human interaction, uh, whether through digital or in-person means, and making sure that we develop those relationships in a way that is not just about being transactional, but is about creating a long-lasting partnership, both whether it's personal or professional. I think is what drives me, and hopefully is what drives a lot of your audience.
Love it. Thank you so much, Kevin. Once again, guys, this has been Just Be Humans with your host, Danny Murawinski. Thank you again so much for Dr. Kevin Switaj for your presence here on the podcast. This is going to go live here a week from today. So I'll be on the lookout for it. And yeah, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.